Test.
Okay.
Hello, hello.
So this is the clicker, and it's just forward. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. So we, in the interest of time, are going to go ahead and get started with our session on equitable biodiversity conservation. Thank you all so much for being here. This conference has been a dream come true so far. I've learned so much, and it's an honor to be joining you. And so for our panel on biodiversity conservation, we have got a set of amazing experts in the world of wildlife conservation. We've got biologists, we've got quantitative scientists, we've got folks who are working on the ground in natural resource management. And so you're going to be learning a lot today. And so the structure of this session will be a series of presentations by our panelists, followed by a Q&A, and we're going to try very hard to fit it all in the time that we have available. So we can go ahead and queue up the first presentation slide, if that's okay. All right, but while we're waiting, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists, and then they're going to kind of come up and give their presentations. And I'm going to start by introducing Dr. Mamie Parker. Let's give her a round of applause. Dr. Mamie Parker is a professional fish and wildlife biologist, a success coach, and principal consultant at Ecologics Group Incorporated. With a distinguished career in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as Chief of Staff, Regional Director, and Head of Fisheries, Dr. Parker has been a trailblazer in conservation and environmental leadership. And she now focuses on coaching and mentoring the next generation of environmental leaders, helping them achieve their goals and make a positive impact. So another round of applause for Dr. Mamie. Next up, we have Deja Perkins in the middle. Deja Perkins is a geospatial analytics PhD candidate, CEO of Naturally Wild LLC, and co-creator of Black Birders Week. As a geospatial urban ecologist and science communicator, Deja is dedicated to increasing diversity and promoting equity and conservation, and her work focuses on participatory science, urban wildlife, and creating inclusive spaces for people of color in the outdoors. Please welcome Deja Perkins. And then finally, we have Alex Troutman, who is the co-organizer of several Black in X weeks, including Black Birders Week, Black Mammalogists Week, and Black and Marine Science Week. This movement encourages diversity in nature, the celebration of Black individual scientists, awareness of Black nature enthusiasts, and diversity in STEAM fields. He has a passion for sharing the wonders of nature and introducing the younger generation to the outdoors, and understands what it's like to grow up without wildlife role models who look like him. So he dedicates his time to fulfilling that representation for future generation for Black and people of color scientists, endeavoring to instill similar passions by leading groups on nature walks, nature hikes, and through public speaking and engagement. So please give it up for Alex Troutman. And then finally, my name is Karina Newsom. I'm the conservation scientist at National Wildlife Federation on our national science team, and it's an honor to be here with you. And I'm going to kick us off with a quick overview to get us started for our equitable biodiversity conservation session. All right, let's get this clicker. Is this clicker on? Is it? Okay, there we go. All right, so when it comes to conservation, as many of you probably understand intimately, conservation is about people. People are the individuals we're interacting with when it comes to who's perpetuating the problems. When we think about corporations, corporations are people. When we think about folks who are making political moves that are not in the best interest of our environments and our communities, those are people. People are also the individuals crafting the solutions and the ones responsible for ensuring our future is one that represents the needs and interests of all communities, and especially those that have been carrying the heaviest burdens. And I want to spend my few minutes just making the case for cities. Because cities are one of the underloved kind of domains when it comes to wildlife conservation, oftentimes treated like pet projects in biodiversity conservation, when that is not and should not be the case. Most people around the globe live in cities, and in the US, almost 80%, about 80% of people live in urban environments, and urban landscapes are expected to increase by as much as 500% in the next 70 or so years. And so we really have to work on ensuring that we don't ignore cities when it comes to conservation, because cities are placed very strategically, geographically speaking. Oftentimes, geography drives where cities are even located, especially when it comes to geologic features like waterways, mountain ranges, et cetera, features that are also really important for biodiversity in that area, biodiversity in the region. And furthermore, cities tend to have outsized impacts on the landscapes that they occupy far beyond the reaches of their geographic boundaries, especially for cities, for example, like Savannah, Georgia, or Philadelphia that are located along waterways. And furthermore, when it comes to biodiversity, biodiversity is a connector. When you think about different species, especially species that move across countries, move across hemispheres, like birds, for example, this is an artistic rendition of the movement of birds across North and South America during their spring and fall migrations. The birds that we might think of as inhabiting and breeding in some of these really large, beautiful, pristine landscapes, like our huge national parks and state parks, right? As they're migrating, they don't just occupy those spaces. In order to make it to those pristine breeding grounds, they have to survive our cities, where there are myriad injustices that are impacting the human communities and the environments where those species are also living and moving through. And so conservation cannot succeed without cities, cannot succeed without the people who live in them. And so for that reason, we have to prioritize cities and conservation, and we have to do it from an equity-centered approach. And just to provide a definition for how I think about equity-centered conservation, this is ensuring that the work that we're doing is providing equal access to environmental resources, environmental amenities, environmental decision-making, given the indifferences in proximity to the decision-making power and the resources because of systemic injustices. And we always want to encourage folks that we're not just stopping at equity, we have to address the injustices. Conservation has to advance environmental justice and right the wrongs that create these differences in proximity to power and environmental resources. Because ultimately, these social inequities, they shape the ecology of our landscapes across the world. They shape our ecology, where biodiversity is, and it even shapes what we know about biodiversity, right? So social inequities determine where there are impervious surfaces, where the pollution is, right? Where the green cover is in our cities. It also impacts what we know about biodiversity. The data about biodiversity falls oftentimes along racial and socioeconomic lines, and Deja is going to be talking quite a bit about this during her presentation. And so this is just a quick screenshot that I like to share a lot from the city of Atlanta. This is eBird data. I'm an ornithologist. I'm a birder. I love birds, so I look at bird data a lot. And you might assume that all of the birds are in the kind of northeastern section of the city, given the data, the way it's laid out. But in fact, there are equally, if not more, birds in the southwestern section, because that's where so much of the forest is, but that's also a predominantly black and predominantly low wealth section of the city. And so data can be misleading when it comes to biodiversity and understanding it. And so when it comes to equity, it requires that our community engagement is community-centered, both in the conservation planning and in the implementation. That includes biodiversity data collection, how we know what kind of biodiversity lives in the places and the landscapes that we occupy and that we're managing. Ensuring that solutions are co-created and done so equitably, so that we're not presenting solutions to communities, but communities are the ones leading on developing the solutions to biodiversity and environmental issues, and that when those solutions are materialized, when those resources become available, that the communities that have been carrying the heaviest burdens of environmental injustices have priority access to the results of that work, the fruits of that labor. And so what do we have to gain? When it comes to conservation that's equitable, we enable ourselves to equip local leadership to have the resources they want, the resources they've identified to help advance stewardship of their ecology locally and environmental justice where they are, and ensure that we have ecological wins that originate in locales and communities that stitch up to landscape and national scale so that we have a conservation movement that is equitable and effective. And so I just really quickly want to shout out Dr. Chris Schell. He's a professor at UC Berkeley. He, along with a herpetologist named Max Lambert, recently edited and published a new textbook called Urban Biodiversity and Equity. It's critical, the information in that textbook. And Deja is actually one of the contributing authors, along with a whole lot of other incredible experts across the country. And so I encourage you to go ahead and check it out. And with that, I'm going to pass it to our next speaker, Dr. Mamie Parker.
Thank you so much. How about a round of applause again for the wonderful job she's done in helping us get this on. We appreciate this. I am so proud to be called auntie among all of these brilliant individuals that I'm sharing this panel with, but also many of you that are in the audience as well. I get emotional when I think about what has already happened since I've been here this morning. And so I assume that a lot of you feel the same way. So if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, your work will surely show it. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. Thank you. So I am really privileged to be here to start this conversation. And what's amazing about this title and being America the Beautiful is that when I did my high school graduation speech that my sister recently sent to me on some note cards that was done almost 50 years ago, the title of my speech was America the Beautiful, that's not so beautiful now. I had heard the words of Marvin Gaye in his song, Mercy, Mercy Me. And he said, things are not like they used to be. What happened to our blue skies? And then he said, radiation in our air and fish full of mercury. And in the words of the young man on different strokes, I said, what you talking about, Willis? Because in my world, and I'm supposed to talk about economics and biodiversity, in my world, the protein in the diet came from fish in the waters and in the streams. And so it was so important for us to think about, even back then, a lot of things have not changed. You've heard over in the room over there earlier about how important food is in terms of biodiversity. I am trying hard to, I like to show this slide, not so much to tell you how you can get in touch with me, but the words at the bottom by Tupac says, keep your head up. And I say that because that's important for two reasons. Number one is right after lunch and you had that wonderful meal, so I don't want you to go to sleep. But number two is because it is so important for us to think about the work that we're doing and why we need to keep our heads up, but also do what I believe we're in a phase of new leadership in many cases that are helping us do a better job when it comes to biodiversity and what we need to get done. And I have to say, I love Al Green too. I talked about Marvin Gaye, but Al Green became my favorite when the former President Barack Obama got up on stage and sang, "Let's Stay Together." And that is another thing that I think, and a takeaway here today, is that we're here, and we're so grateful for the organizers to get us here, that it's important for us not to let anyone divide us. We have to stay together and meet at the top. We are the new era and the new leadership that's involved. And it's important for us to think about bringing equity to our restoration projects. I had the privilege of working in the Midwest most of my career in Minnesota and Wisconsin and Missouri on the many projects like the National Farm Bill, and looking at easements on properties and many of the black farmers have been shut out of that process. And how do we bring them back in? Because those are some economic benefits that we don't always know about and we're not always a part of. Accessing our national parks and public lands, including our national wildlife refuges. That's so important as we think about the new era and where we need to go to make sure that all of us are a part of biodiversity and meeting that 30 by 30 goal. And then, of course, the next generation and water leaders that are out there working together. And it's not hard because many of us are pioneers. Pioneers are very lonesome people. We have a lot of things that we have to deal with. So we think about this new era. We think about what I call the P's and why it's important when we think about economics, we think about biodiversity and meeting our goals. It's about the people, and you've heard a little bit about that already from Karina. Places, I mentioned those briefly, and I'll talk a little bit more about those in the next minute or so. But I've spent a lot of my career at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, whether or not it was a biologist working on Section 10404 permits with the Corps of Engineers and EPA, or whether it was working on federal projects and highways and bridges and roads that intersect many of our black and brown communities and displace many of the individuals that are in those areas. So not only are they tearing down our trees and cutting down the trees in those communities, but we're also getting rid of a lot of the businesses that are there, and over the years that's happened. I live in Northern Virginia now, right outside of Washington, D.C., and I see data centers doing some of the same work that we saw back in the 60s and 70s where we're displacing people. Policies, we need to get involved more and help be there, whether it's NEPA or many other policies that are there. Karina's talked a little bit about the community-centered conservation, where we need to be more inclusive to get to success. But I want to mention green jobs. As I think about my career in conservation, my why in conservation, it started here on Bayou Bartholomew in southern Arkansas. It was here, the longest bayou in the world, over 367 species. My mother took me here to fish for the first time, but also many life lessons. As we think about economics, as we think about biodiversity and how we need to move together, one of the things that I remember the most when she said to me, no deposit, no return. There was something on a Coke bottle. We have to make deposits. We have to get deposits from federal programs that are out there, from state programs that are there, and local counties and others that are there to get returns. And so Bayou Bartholomew is where it all started for me. But another thing she taught me, and that's because she lined up all 11 of us most days to tell us, you're a Parker Rollins. And in our family, you go out and make us proud of you. Now, she would say it in these words, you're a piece of work. Now look at your neighbor now and tell him, you're a piece of work. You are a piece of work. Look at your neighbor now, you are a piece of work. And again, I think you heard that you have to hear, in order to really appreciate Brussels sprouts, you have to eat it more than once. The adult learner needs to hear things 17 times to commit it to memory. My point here is we are all here together, and we need to find ways to stay together. My final thought on this, I mentioned pioneers being very lonesome people. In the 3rd grade, my mother thought it was a brilliant idea to make me the one to integrate my 3rd grade class at a white school. And this is the environment that most of us are in this room, and I know on this panel here. And I know that there are times when we want to quit, and we don't want to keep going and growing. But we need people that are like Logan, that are like others that are in the audience, that are our mentors, that are allies for us. We need people that are like Adrian in the back of the room that can give us what we need to keep going and growing. For me, I'd sat in that classroom for many, many days, And the white parents told the black parents, the white students not to talk to me. And then one day, when I was about to quit, my mother told me to go just one more day. And little Paula Spurlock came. And little Paula said, my mommy says I'm a leader. And she said, if I'm a leader and I want to talk to you, I should do it. And she said, when I talk to you, June's going to talk to you. And if June talks to you, Donna is going to play with you. That was my first experience with allyship, and why it's important that we need all hands on deck. So the next day, I wonder why she said this. She said, I'm going to play with you tomorrow. I was like, what about today, Paula? I'm ready to go play now. Tomorrow, we jumped rope together and became the double Dutch jump roping queens of the playground. But again, good things come in good times when it's appropriate for us to do that. So this is my conservation journey and all of these different locations throughout the United States for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, working on these projects in special places. Biodiversity, conservation, we need all hands on deck to make sure these things are done and done right. And there are resources available, and we don't always get our share because of capacity building. A new era, a new opportunity. The National Wildlife Federation finally did this great round table, and we got all types of black individuals to come together and talk about what we needed. We've done research to say, and you can see this on their website, and as a board member of the National Wildlife Federation, I think it's really important. In order for us to really do more in conservation, biodiversity, we have to amplify the voices of the underestimated. We're starting that here today. You've started that in your own individual programs. Accessibility and affordability. Those national wildlife refuges, they're within 1 hour of every major city, but there are no bus routes to get them there. So how do we get appreciation? How do we afford to go to these places? And the historical trauma. Mama told me when I went outside, be careful. When Paula went outside, Mama told her to have fun. And so there are some issues there. Calling out racism and cultural factors are so important. And then enhancing those childhood experiences. This is something that really, I feel like as a new leader is so important. This man was the man that really recruited me to get into conservation. And he said to me, you gotta overcome many of your fears. As we think about biodiversity, as we think about the economic benefits and the public responsibilities, we have to overcome many fears. He led me to believe my first job was gonna be in Arkansas. It was in Wisconsin. He was like a sleazy used car salesperson. But that fear got me to Wisconsin and got me to where I am. And I think the message on this slide is an important one. Keep trying, keep going, and keep growing. Thank you for your time and attention.
The big green is forward. Okay. Hello, everybody. All right, so my name is Deja Perkins. I'm currently a PhD candidate at NC State studying geospatial analytics. So this is, thank you, future Dr. Perkins. As a geospatial analyst, urban ecologist, a lot of this presentation is gonna be about maps and kind of looking at a lot of different images. And today I'm gonna be talking about the impact of social inequity on participatory science engagement. So what is participatory science? It's really a people-powered science. So we have a lot of, it's this big umbrella full of a lot of different ways to engage the public in science. So on one side, we have things like citizen science, public participation in scientific research, crowdsourcing, these really large-scale ways to engage people in science. And then on the other side, I have a few examples that are more community-based, so like community-based participatory research, community science, participatory action research, and participatory GIS, things that involve the community a little bit more. And so one of the main things I want you to take away is that we have these three types. One is kind of top-down, institution-driven, large in scale, data collection is the goal. And then we have things that are community science, more bottom-up, grassroots, community-driven, smaller in scale, and more environmental justice oriented. But where I think we need to start going is this last option, where we kind of meet in the middle, a more collaborative or co-created research, where we kind of combine the goals of institution and the people who are being impacted to create partnership. Usually it's a little bit smaller in scale, but the goal can vary because it is that more collaborative model. And participatory science is being done right now to help us understand the future. And so work being done by Audubon with their community science programs, it's helping us understand how climate is shifting and how it's going to affect different species at different ranges. And you can go on their website to view their survival by degrees report and see how even just small 1, 2, 3 degree temperature shifts are going to be impacting the range of different species and how that's going to impact how we need to manage them. And then we have projects like eBird, which helps us understand migration patterns and how different species are moving across hemispheres. So this science is really helping us understand the future of the species and the areas that we care about. But the issue is participatory science still has a diversity problem. There are a lot of biases, primarily demographic. So the majority of participants are white. They skew older in age. They're highly educated, highly STEM educated, and a lot of them have a lot of money. And this is being seen in water monitoring projects. This is from Illinois River Watch, which the goal is to monitor rivers and waterways that are in peril. However, their community base is predominantly white, which is not the predominant demographics of the broader state of Illinois. And the same thing with their education. They found that the majority of their participants are higher educated. Most have graduate professional degrees and some type of bachelor degree or some associate's degree, whereas the majority of the population of Illinois is much more varied. So they're not really reaching the people or the places who can help them achieve their goals. We see this again with eBird. So that project that's helping us understand how birds are shifting and ranges are changing, they have a very similar issue. So they're in the, which one is it? They're in the orange are the broader public, and then we have bird watchers in the blue. And so you can even see just very quickly that their participant base does not match that of the general public. And this matters because it plays out in our data. And so this is work that I did for my master's, really just looking at the difference between when you structure a project versus when you allow people to go and sample where they want to go. So in the orange dots, we have a structured project, the Tucson Bird Count, and you can see that because they're telling people where to go, they're able to sample across a variety of wealth and richness gradients. Whereas with eBird, which is a semi-structured project, they allow people to go sample whenever, wherever they want. It's based on the people who participate. They go to the areas that are highest of priority to them, which may leave us with a skewed view of the data that we have, the information that we have to inform how birds are shifting, what areas are important for bird conservation. And even on another water-based scale, so this is with the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. This is a project that monitors precipitation, which can be important for things like flooding, important for things like figuring out how to distribute FEMA resources, money to help communities recover. But when we look at participation, here we have two cities, the one with a lot of green on it. It's in Baltimore City, and you can kind of see, is there? No, that doesn't work. Okay, so you can kind of see there's this black butterfly. This is where the majority of black residents inhabit in the city of Baltimore, yet you can see there's not really a lot of these white dots. And so we wanted to see where there was at least a single rain gauge, a single place where they're monitoring precipitation. They really aren't monitoring it in the communities where Black people predominantly reside. But you see in a lot of these spaces where, that are kind of like orange, yellowish, these tan spaces, these are places that lack BIPOC individuals. And you can see in the second figure of Portland City, where they don't have a lot of BIPOC individuals, they do have a lot of rain gauges. And so they're more engaged in these projects. They're more informed about what's going on with the precipitation in their communities. And so what leads to these patterns of bias, Karina touched on it a little bit earlier. So people are who create these structures. People create our urban environments. People decide where things go. And we all have these biases, these thoughts, these opinions, these values that get passed down from our family. We're taught these different ways of thinking. And all those different ways of thinking inform how we feel about things like residential segregation, immigration policy, resource allocation, gentrification, and that really informs the people who are in charge of deciding where different things go. So it informs where our impervious surface is, where all of our gray area is, which is what concentrates heat in certain areas of the city, where green space is concentrated, pollutants, resources, and disease, and overall, the different patterns that we as scientists end up studying. And then in figure B is a more recent figure that I was a part of from a paper where we looked at participatory science and the potential filters that can impact what we know about an area. So at the top there, we have, the total potential area that could be sampled, so let's say a city. And then that second filter is just what we have access to. So what we have access to, we may have to sample in our neighborhood. We may not be able to get on a bus or a train or have a car to get somewhere else. So that immediately restricts what we're able to investigate. And then depending on the time of day, so when we go out, if we're going out sampling during the day, then we're missing species that are occurring at night. Or if we're going out in the middle of the day, we're missing species in the morning and in the evening. So that restricts us even more. Thinking about volunteer choice, so where within what you have access to in the time of day, like maybe you're going to sample in a park versus in your, like walking down your block. And then thinking about rare versus common, so people who might be more experienced and they only want to sample rare, tiny, itty-bitty warblers at the top of the tree versus something a little bit more common like a sparrow. But it's important to know about all of those different species and to understand how they're being impacted by things like climate change. And so thinking about this, how all of these different filters impact the data, this figure was from the same paper. So in A, you can see the human population. This is across St. Louis. And then in B, you can see the distribution of race. So at the top, you have most of the Black residents concentrated. And then at the bottom, you have white. And then a little bit towards, I'll say the east, or we have a mixture. But then when we look at where canopy cover is concentrated, it kind of matches the distribution of race as well as city parks. And then when you look at things like where the observations are occurring, you have the eBird and the iNaturalist observations primarily occurring in the areas that are predominantly white. You're not seeing that occurring as much in those other areas. And so we're not getting a complete picture. We're not getting a complete picture of what's occurring. So we are missing out on the different stories. We're essentially erasing those stories from science and what we know. And so this is my last slide, I promise. This is from a recent paper that I'm currently working on, which looks at nationwide patterns of race and income for eBird and iNaturalist. And so A and B are going to be urban areas, and C and D are rural areas. But you can see, like, as the percentage of BIPOC increases in urban areas, the probability of observations decreases. Yet, as the income increases, the probability for observation also increases. And this changes a little bit in urban versus rural environments, primarily because the systems that create where people are distributed in urban and rural environments differs. And I would talk about that, but I do think I'm out of time. Yeah.
Hey, how y'all doing? All right, so my name is Alex Troutman, and I'll be talking about welcoming all to make a more like biodiverse field. But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about the current climate. And this ain't working for me. All right, so I already talked about that. Making a biodiversity field welcoming to all people. Usually error. Anyway, so before we talk about welcoming, like making the biodiverse field welcoming for all, let's talk about the current state of it. So right now, the conservation field, that includes like forestry, wildlife biologists, wildlife biologists. The field is 80% white and BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color make up about less than 20% of this total population, which is not equivalent to what the rest of the United States look like in general. So we need to increase that if we're gonna look at making a truly biodiverse field and making it welcome for everybody. So what can we do to make the biodiverse field welcome to all people? In order to make that field more welcome, we have to look at these right here. We have to make it a safe field first. We have to make sure that it's accessible for everyone. We have to make sure that we are removing barriers that are blocking people from coming into this field. We're making sure that we're going to be building a new table that's welcoming for all. We're going to consider all ideas and knowledge, and we also are going to acknowledge our privilege, because we all have privilege. All right, so what does it mean to make the field safe? First off, safe means like coming home in the same mental, physical, and emotional state that you left in. So when we're looking at this, we're looking at understanding that what's safe for me is not safe what's safe for everyone else. It's a changing fluid, kind of like the science is always changing. Well, the idea of safe is changing. What's safe for me yesterday, when I could walk around without a broken leg, it's not safe for me now. Just like what's safe for you or someone who's a white individual in a room is not going to be safe for me as a Black individual. Like, for instance, I work as a wildlife biologist, and I went out to a homeowner in Alabama with one of my coworkers who had been a biologist for years in that region, and we went out there. He didn't do any call-ins and say, hey, we're going to be at this property. Is it okay? So we went out there. When we got there, the gate was locked. I was like, okay, this already starting off bad. We went to another gate. It was locked. And finally, after about 30 minutes sitting, we got in touch with the landowner, and they was like, oh, yeah, just go in the gate if it's open. So we found the gate that was open, went in, saw the project. As we were going through the gate, there was a house that was there on property, and people were watching us, and my Black senses was already tingling like, something's gonna happen here. So we went out there, looked at the project, and on the way back, someone stopped in the middle of the road and was like, yo, what are you guys doing here? And then once they pulled up and saw our Fish and Wildlife Service truck, he was like, oh, I see your badge. You guys are good. But the biologist was like, he was all buddy-buddy with them. I was like, no, this dude, I didn't say that, but this dude is literally impeding our way, and you're sitting here talking to him, all buddy-buddy with him. But we need to understand that sometimes everyone doesn't have situational awareness and understand that what's safe for me is not safe for the next person. So we need to check sure that we're always been safe for everyone. And then next, we all have a connection to nature, but we all don't have equal access and safe access at that. So where are some of the barriers? I'll just highlight a couple of these. So it's things like systemic racism, it's microaggressions, implicit bias. One that I really want to look at, the silver sneaker pass, and that's with someone who has a long history of being an organization, getting a pass for some of the things they do just because they are older or they've been there longer. So they're making homophobic or racist comments. So people are like, oh, they're not really like that, or don't mind him. Like, no, just because they're old, they don't get passes to do that. They should be nixed out because they should know better. They've been through so many diversity or inclusion trainings that it should be ingrained in their mind right now. They probably already heard it 3, 4, or if they're adult, 17 times. So they should go ahead and get the nix. But also another thing is traditions. Saying we have always done it this way. So going back to safety, I've been here 10 years and we always win the field by ourselves. So why does Johnny need to have a partner? He can do it. He's a man. Let him go out by himself. So things like that are some other barriers that are stopping people from becoming in this field and making it a more welcome field. Next, what can we do to welcome all through the doorway of the biodiversity field? So it's acknowledging our privilege. With that, everyone has a different privilege. For me, I have more privilege than women or non-binary people. Someone who's white has more privilege than me as a black individual. We all have to acknowledge our privilege and use it to either open doors for other individuals. Sometimes it's holding the door open, but also sometimes it's maybe bearing the bear of individual who's coming to harm somebody. So we might have to use our privilege to make someone else feel safe or welcome. And sometimes it might be using our privilege as someone who has a certain influence to say, I'm going to use my influence to make sure this doesn't happen to the next person, or you know what, this stops at me. I'm going to take it so no one else has to feel the way that I feel, or what happened to me doesn't happen to anybody else. Next, we must engage the whole team. So that's everybody, black, white, indigenous, young kids, old kids. If we're going to make the biodiversity field welcoming for all, we have to make sure we're acknowledging all, we're involving all, from the young to the old people, and also people from different racial backgrounds, as well as social and economic status. We all can not only learn from everybody, learn something new from everybody, but also we all make the world work, just like the biodiversity of ecosystems. It will be in dire stress if you remove something out from that ecosystem. Us as humans, individuals, we work best when we're working in diverse groups, like a clock. A clock has many different gears, but they're all not the same. They all don't have the same number of teeth, the same shaped teeth. Otherwise, it would just be butting against each other. But with different teeth, they all can turn around and make the hands on the clock move. So that's what we must do in order to make the biodiversity field more welcoming. Is we all have to get everybody involved in order to turn the dials, to turn the handles. Next, we must dismantle and destroy systems that was never meant for us all, like these tables, the conservation table that everyone say, hey, come have a seat at. We need to destroy that, burn it. It's built on racism, it's built on slavery, it's built on the blood and sweat of our ancestors. It's a dirty table and just have a new tablecloth over it. And that's not good. So we need to destroy that table and make a table where all can come, and it's not a table that say, hey, come look at our work that you contributed to, but it's a table that say, hey, come look at the work that we all contribute to. Because a table that's built on taintedness can still be a table of progressive work, or possessive, I guess is the word I'm looking for. It's a possessive table, like this is work that we did when really it's work that we all did, but we're gonna talk about this little group that we did. So we need to destroy the table and make sure it's a table that we all can freely give ideas for everyone. Next, Just because we're welcoming somebody, it's not mean we're just providing access. It's providing access, but also making sure we're telling them, giving them all the pieces of the table or pieces of the story, like, hey, Alex, you can come eat at my table. Here's my key, the keys to my house, but also realizing that, hey, I have a dog, so you might want to watch out. Or saying, hey, here's the keys. The code is 458. You can have anything in the refrigerator. Here, you need some gas to get there, go get it. It's not just saying, hey, here's the keys to my house, go eat, but you don't tell me how to get there. You don't tell me that you have a dog. You don't tell me about the security system. So it's making sure you're providing everything and not just access. And then again, more people means better science, a better and diverse field. So we need to make sure we're acknowledging everybody, including historical, ecological knowledge, the knowledge of the Go-Geechee individuals as well. And I think I'm about out of time, but anyways, we need to make sure the field is inclusive, not just diverse. Because diversity is like these sugar cookies. You can wipe off the diversity, but inclusive is like these chocolate chip cookies. If you want to take the inclusivity out of the cookies, you're going to have to take them apart and take the chocolate out, but there's still going to be a little bit of inclusion left in the cookies. So we need to be more inclusive and not just diverse.
All right. We're going to go ahead now and move on to our audience Q&A, and Logan is going to handle the mics for us. And so if you've got a question for the panel, please feel free to raise your hand, and Logan will come and meet you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. My name is Jazzery Taylor. I go by Jazz. I'm with Latino Outdoors. So thank you all on the panel for inspiring me. I'm also in a doctoral program, and so I'm in the beginning stages on like how can I leverage my privilege as a biracial individual to amplify the needs of my community, right? And so you've definitely given me tons to work with and think about, but I just happened to pull up my Twitter account, and less than an hour ago, we had Elon Musk tweet a screenshot of different statistics of the woke mind virus in academia. And these were terms or words that were used throughout all kinds of dissertations, research, conversations. Some of the words on there are racism, racist, anti-gay, transphobia. And Elon Musk retweeted saying that, I hope the public is starting to understand just how evil and dangerous the woke mind virus is to our civilization. It's suicidal. So with that being said, and our conversation today about the importance of equity, biodiversity in this movement, what would be a response to combat his, I guess, tweet, his vision, his perspective on how important the woke mind is to this movement?
I'll start out with this. The woke mind is not a virus, it's an epidemic, and we're coming to flip tables, and you should be scared.
Hello? Oh. Hello? Okay. So there were some pieces of that kind of stood out to me from his propaganda that he's spewing. And I feel like it was something about like our society or our community or something, and it's just like the question that continuously pops up in my mind is like whose society, whose community are they talking about? Because in my mind, like the reason why they feel so threatened is because everything has been centered around whiteness for so long. And now that like the woke mindset is all about being aware of different experiences and how other people are impacted, they feel threatened that somebody else's perspective is centered. Can you repeat a little bit of your question? Sorry. I can hear you.
Just like, what would your response be to the importance of wokeness in academia, but in this movement specifically?
Yeah, I mean, a variety of minds and perspectives are important because we're kind of like what I mentioned in my presentation, like we all have different experiences, perspectives, and values that we're taught. And so when you have a group of the same who have the same experiences, who all think the same, it kind of just becomes a bubble, and you're excluding. Our country is so diverse in who makes it up. And so we need to really think more about making sure we have a variety of perspectives and ways to go about tackling these challenges, because if not, then we're probably going to miss out on somebody's brilliance on how to solve the problem.
All right. Other questions? Yes, Olivia.
Hello, my name is Olivia Juarez at Green Latinos, and I'm a supporter of the Coalition's Backbone team. I have a question about the role of culture and interpretation and how you think that might uphold biodiversity. In my perspective, I think there's a not very sophisticated but also compelling and just simple truth of stories such as how the monarch butterfly, for example, is connected to Latino culture because it has this super spiritual significance for like Dia de los Muertos. And so there's this very simple argument that like our communities should care about ecosystem health to protect this cultural, spiritual being of significance for us. And in a way, I wonder like, is that enough? Do we have to have those kinds of stories like from different cultures to be able to like say, this is why we should be a resource to do this conservation work? And so I don't know, just kind of like food for thought that I want to put out there. And in general, I want to ask what y'all think about the role of like storytelling and connection back to culture and identity as a like path to equity-centered and effective conservation.
Absolutely. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Absolutely. So in my line of work, we call that reframing. So right now, a lot of these projects are centered around a single frame, a very white Western frame. Yet when we want to engage different groups, we have to kind of reframe the project to think about why might this particular species that we're working on be of importance to a different community, and incorporate that frame in order to make it more more appealing, to make them want to participate, because a lot of these projects are extractive. And so they're like, oh, we want bodies. We just want people to participate to help us reach our goal. Okay, but what about what the community needs? Like, what is important to them? And if the frame that you just mentioned is what's important to your community, then that should be incorporated, because it is important, period.
Yeah, I totally agree with her. And I think the storytelling is so important to make these messages heard. And that's why I love some of the work that we get from the National Park Service. They're trying to do more of that right now. But I think that I look at my own story when I decided that I wanted to get a PhD. You know, even my family said, you want to be a fish doctor? Why not a real doctor? And so I had to really help make that connection on how I could help and my colleagues could help by having fish doctors really looking at how we are poisoning our bodies through the food that we're eating. In addition to that, I'm a member of 2 organizations, Black women organizations, that I think are so important. One of them is Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, the pink and green one, and the other one's the Links Incorporated. So if you're looking for Black groups that are doing some things with conservation, look at both of those. But with the Links, what we've done is we have slides that we show at many of our national meetings where we talk about, we show strawberries, we show apples, and we say, we need pollinators to have these. So we help make that connection, how pollinators, 1 in every 3 bites that we take is because of an animal pollinator. But we have to break it down and make it that connection for communities like that. And so, and we have to bring the human side of us into the equation. Many of us scientists, we don't have high emotional intelligence. No judgment, just facts. And I think, and we're less comfortable telling stories and talking about this. 20 years ago, when I told a story about my mother and all of that, that was just not something that was done in our communities. But I really believe that we have to tell the stories. Otherwise, they will be told by the anti-woke. They will be told by Elon Musk and others.
Just to kind of add on top of that, within the system of academia where science is taught, you also have to think about who is teaching us the science and what frames we're being taught within. So even though like I want to do community-based work, I have to relearn after coming out of the system of academia, because we're not taught to tell stories. Like even though like in my community, that is how knowledge is passed down through storytelling, like a lot of academia doesn't see value in it. And so being a Black woman within academia, I'm constantly fighting against like what I'm being taught and then thinking critically about, is that the way that it should be, even though that's the way it's currently taught.
All right, I saw Adrian, and then we'll go over here.
Thank you so much, Adrian Angulo, Nuestra Tierra Conservation Project. I just wanted to, I guess, share an anecdote and a quick question. Xerxes Society came out to my community to teach us how to tag monarch butterflies. And for my community in Sonora, in Mexico, you know, monarch butterflies are pretty sacred. They're like moving across their ancestors. So touching them and catching them and putting a little sticky tab just on their wing was kind of like taboo for me and a lot of folks. But I asked a question to the Xerxes Society person who was suffering from whiteness at the time. I asked, you know, what's the mortality rate of the monarch butterflies after they've been handled? She said, oh, don't worry, there are like tens of millions of them, you know, it'll be fine. And I just found that to be really difficult. And I understand that this is like the best possible method to track, and that's super important. So I guess I just pose it as like, and I think, you know, one of you just spoke to that, like, who is teaching us? And we're coming from a certain framework, but I guess I'm wondering, are there any inroads or like low-hanging pieces of fruit that we can start to say, hey, this is wrong, and there's an opportunity here to change the way that we start to gather the data that doesn't harm communities that have a different perspective of the way, yeah, the things we're studying.
I'm sorry, I know I keep talking, but yes, you bring up very good points, especially, so what I was taught when I was like taking entomology and the way that a lot of insect people think, because they think that there are like so many insects, it doesn't matter what happens to a few of them, even though we know that a few adds up to a lot. And so it is kind of, because most of insect management is taught through a like, what's it called? Pesticide, thank you, pest management framework. And that's where a lot of the funding comes from as well. It's the way that we think about that definitely needs to change. However, when it comes to who is doing the changing, we have to first penetrate those spaces and gain access to them so that we can be the ones that are implementing the change. And so, you know, doing this community-based work, and like even though being someone in academia, I still feel like it is important for me to use this space that I have been able to access, this knowledge that I've been able to access, to bring it back to my community, to help us make change, because unfortunately, my family and a lot of my peers don't have access to those spaces. And so it's about not forgetting where you came from and bringing a lot of that back to figure out how to implement the change.
So I'll be brief on this one and say that we have to look at pay equity too. I serve as the former chair of the Student Conservation Association, and there's a great internship program. 76% of the leaders in conservation have gone through that program. But you have to be rich and really, or have someone who has money for you to be able to even afford to be an intern, because they don't pay them very much money. So part of who teaches us, we have to start on who finances us and get us to where we need to be, and that's equitable pay. And sometimes that's even looking at how we get to our first jobs. When I first started as an intern, I signed my papers and I was ready to go, and I realized I was going to Wisconsin. I got there and the guy said, "Do you have money for your security deposit?" Well, I didn't even know what that was, because we lived in our little shanty back in Arkansas and we owned it. So, you know, having money for just the basic needs and to be able to enter this field of study is something that we need to think about. And how do we reframe that? And how do we look at ways in which we can offer transportation dollars? I didn't get paid for 4 weeks after I got the job. How am I going to eat in 4 weeks? So there's some basic Maslow theory of motivation that we need to think about as we're looking at teachers and others.
Yeah, and sometimes, like, it's our role as the leaders or the scientists of those communities to come back and say, like, hey, I know you don't understand what's going on here. Come out with me. Come bird banding with me. And that can expose them to, like, see what's going on, but also may come up with an idea like, hey, I see how this is going on. Maybe if we do it this way, we can make it safer for our community or safer for the animal that's being studied. So it could be you providing a foundation or an idea for something, a research project to help the insect, the bird, in a safer way than what is currently being proposed. Science is always changing, so are the methods. So sometimes it's giving that spark, that exposure to someone in your community to make a change in the method that we're doing.
All right. Well, I think we'll probably be able to do one more question, but I hate to give everybody homework, but we do have a short survey that we're hoping folks can fill out related to this topic of equity-centered biodiversity conservation. So basically, this is to think about some future potential workshops that the America the Beautiful for All Coalition would like to put on to support community-based organizations, tribes, other entities in advancing equity-centered biodiversity conservation. So we greatly appreciate you taking the time to fill this out, and we can maybe do one more question just while folks are starting to plug away on that, or just listen to the question, keep it up on your phone, and make sure you take that survey afterward. All right, I think I saw a hand over here.
Thank you. Karen Linnell from Alaska. I really appreciate you sharing the differences in interpreting data and looking at it in those maps and showing the picture, because they give us data often in different pages and different charts, and then you can't see the whole picture. And through just that little bit that you showed, you painted a very different picture than what they're doing. And a lot of it, the work that we do is surrounded by taking their data and looking at it and interpreting it from an indigenous perspective. So I appreciate you folks bringing that up. I do want to say in one of our first goals when we first formed was to grow our own professionals. And we found that reaching out through the high schools and stuff, that often that was too late. And so now we're starting to work with middle school, even into elementary school, starting to talk to them about the sciences and the fun stuff that they can do. And I think that's something that we can all take home to try and get to having more of our own people in these professional positions and positions of leadership. we can't be so short-sighted to only want them to work for us. We need to get them into positions of leadership at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, at the Alaska Department of Natural Resources, and Washington, D.C. And so I wanted to share that. And also, I love that you're getting into GIS. He who has the best maps wins. He who has the best data wins. And so having professionals like yourselves and then us growing our own, that's how we're going to start to make change, is through that data collection and that interpretation of that data. So thank you so much for all your hard work.
Thank you.
Thank you, and that's a wonderful note to end on. Please give our panelists a warm round of applause. And thank you so much for joining us for our panel on equity-centered biodiversity conservation. If you have future questions or anything you'd like to discuss with any of them or us, please feel free to reach out to us during the course of the conference, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
And don't forget to take the survey.